Welcome to KOCT's Roundtable. I'm Alison St, and if you care about how Oceanside is growing and changing, this is an important show to watch. We'll be talking with both our city manager and our assistant city manager about things happening at the city that affect your quality of life and the future of this town. Jonathan Borrego was appointed Oceanside City Manager quite recently, in August of this year, but he was Development Services Director for 4 years before that and served as Deputy City Manager for the last 2 years. He was the Manager of Planning Services for the City of Anaheim for nearly 30 years before that, so he has a lot of experience under his belt of managing growth and new building here in Southern California. He has a BA in Political Science and a Master's degree in Public Administration from Cal State University, Long Beach. Michael Gossman is also a relatively recent transplant to Oceanside. He came from Sonoma County, where he was a finance director and the first director of the Office of Recovery and Resilience after the terrible wildfires in the 2017 timeframe north of San Diego. He's been Oceanside's assistant manager for the last 2 years. So I'd like to welcome you both and thank you both very much for being willing to come in and talk a bit about the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, I wanted to ask, many of the people running for office on the council, for example, have been Oceanside residents for years and years, and their ancestors have been residents, but you two have come here relatively recently. Why did you pick Oceanside as a place to live and work?
So, well, personally, I can say that one of the reasons that I came to Oceanside and decided to leave my former city after many years there was I was very excited about the opportunities that I saw in terms of the growth projections that were envisioned here in the city and a lot of the forward planning that was taking place. In researching whether or not I thought I was going to be a good fit for the community, I saw that there were a lot of forward planning projects that were in place, including some general plan updates, some coastal planning that was taking place, planning efforts along various corridors along the city here, and that really did appeal to me. I happen to be someone who enjoys being a part of a community that is experiencing growth and doing my best to try and manage that growth to fit the broad needs of the community, and I thought it was a perfect fit based on what I saw was happening in this community. And even though I wasn't raised in San Diego County, I actually do have a lot of family here and spent a lot of time in the county during many years, and so I'm very familiar with the area and the region, and have always loved the area, so to have an opportunity to work here was a pretty easy choice for me at the end of the day.
So it looked like a city with a lot of potential, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And what about you, Michael?
Similarly to what Jonathan said, I knew about Oceanside and I saw the changes that were happening, and I saw it as it's a real jewel along the coast because it's different than almost every other coastal city that you'll find all the way up and down, where there's still a lot of diversity. There's still an opportunity for for middle-income people to live near the beach and have a really good quality of life. That was really appealing to me. I also loved what I saw was going on in the downtown area, the type of growth that was happening and the positive changes that were occurring. I'm a lifelong Californian, and growing up in Southern California, we would even come to Oceanside, I remember, as a kid, so I thought that was kind of a cool opportunity as well, and I haven't regretted it. I love the organization and I love the city.
I did notice that you came from a place where emergency response was kind of very much what you threw yourself into. Have you done anything much in terms of emergency response for Oceanside?
Well, yeah, interestingly, I started, it was really about 2.5 years ago, and it was just prior to COVID. So 2 things happened. I didn't necessarily foresee that when I started, but as soon as I started, we had some historic floods. And because of my experience in wildfire recovery and other types of recovery, I kind of dove right into that and assisting with forward planning on recovery efforts as well as the emergency response, and then transition from that right into COVID, where it's a different type of disaster, but it's still a disaster and you still have to plan for recovery. So I developed the first continuing operations plan for the city that was specific really to a pandemic, but it came together very well, and we had a lot of changes along the way, and it took a lot of agility and responsiveness, not necessarily on my part, but on the part of the whole city, and it was a real interesting way for the city to showcase to me how flexible and adaptable and hardworking the staff is and management alike.
Okay. Well, in speaking briefly with you two, it seems like you're a pretty close team, which is always a good thing to know. So, Jonathan, how do you divide the responsibilities? Because you've got two of you and you can't all do everything. So who does what in your team?
So the city administration, actually, it's comprised of three positions. It's the city manager, the assistant city manager, then we also have a deputy city manager as well, who's Rob O'Brien, who's our recently appointed deputy city manager. And so amongst the three of us, we divide up the departments and oversee various aspects of that. I personally oversee the Development Services Department, which is, the department that I came in to lead when I was first hired by the city. In addition, I oversee the public safety operations as well. Michael, I'll let you speak to the groups that you oversee.
So I oversee the finance division, which fits well for me because I do have primarily a background in finance over most of my career, and also the water utilities division, where I've worked in water utility space for many years, specifically as a CFO up in the Bay Area. And then thirdly is the libraries division. And which was a new thing for me, but it's been really exciting to learn about that. The economic development division was one area that I recently took over, and that's something really exciting for me because of the opportunities and the economic development opportunities that exist. So that's been a lot of fun, honestly. And then also, I think because of the size of our department and the way we work, we all kind of do everything. So there's several special projects that I manage. Specifically, the big one has been homelessness, which obviously is a high priority for the city, and so that's an area where I wouldn't say that I oversee all homeless activities, but I try to coordinate it from the city manager's office, because obviously homelessness affects all departments in different ways, and we try to be coordinated and integrated as we respond to that. And then just several various special projects as they come up, and I also deal a lot with legislative advocacy or lobbying, as well as media inquiries that come directly to the city manager's office. So.
Okay. I think, some people might wonder, well, what's the relationship between the city council and the city managers? And I'm just going to read what it says here at the city website.
Sure.
The City of Oceanside operates under the council manager form of government. The city manager provides leadership, guidance and support to city departments, and implements policies, goals and objectives as established by the Oceanside City Council. So, how much power do you have to actually make decisions and just go ahead, and how much do you really have to wait for the City Council to make a decision on things?
Well, this City Council that we have in place is very good about setting policy and policy direction. So essentially, once the council sets that policy, and we'll often go back to the City Council and get a specific direction if there's a significant policy decision that needs to be made. But based on the direction that we're given from council, I will say that, myself and others in the city manager's office do have quite a bit of authority to make the individual day-to-day decisions to bring that policy into fruition. And so, a lot of our time is spent directing staff to accomplish certain tasks or to prioritize certain programs or activities in response to meeting the needs of council. And so it's an ever-changing world, depending on what types of issues are happening out in the community. We'll often get policy direction to proceed down a certain path. My role as the city manager is to direct our resources to implement the goals of the city council with respect to that particular issue. And so it's a very dynamic place, as Michael mentioned. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this job is the fact that from one day to the next, from one week to the next, you never know what sort of issue is going to come up in the community, especially with the community of our size and its diversity. And so we're constantly on our toes, shuffling resources around, making sure that we're carrying out the goals of the city council and the policy direction. So it's a pretty dynamic place, but it's fun.
You were mentioning, speaking of everything changing, that Measure X, which was the half-cent sales tax that we all voted in and has been responsible for all the new development around the pier, for example, and a lot of other developments in the town, but that now you're having to reassess how we're going to spend Measure X money. And that is a big pot of money. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about how big it is and how you're having to change it. Why are you having to change it at this point?
Sure, absolutely. So Measure X, which is our half-cent sales tax, has been a tremendous benefit to the city. And I will say that, you know, in terms of the vision for Measure X, when it was first pitched to the local voters for implementation, I think personally the city's done a great job of implementing the vision that was carried forward in that sales tax measure. In terms of the types of projects that we've been able to, you know, bring forward, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Michael since he manages that program in terms of some of the accomplishments that we've seen. And to your point, we do an annual review and allocation of those fundings. We just are bringing forward right now an update to the spending plan, which Michael can speak a little bit about, but it's been a great tool for us to use.
Well, yeah, it's always nice to have money. And you were saying that, in fact, it's not that we have less than we thought, it's that we have more than we thought. How come?
So when we originally, going back to when the first Measure X spending plan was published, we were looking forward 7 years, and in that 7 years, we had all these projects we wanted to accomplish, and we really weren't even sure if we would have the funding to accomplish those projects. But then year over year, we did a really great job as a city of managing the monies that we had, seeking grant opportunities where we could, so we didn't use the Measure X money.
Sort of matching funds.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then on top of that, we were pleasantly surprised, and we've been very fortunate, and credit to the City Council for the policies that it puts in place and the approach that we took through COVID, we've seen better than expected revenues from Measure X. So through that, at the Measure X spending plan that we produced last year, we were forecasting a $9.9 million surplus at the end of Measure X. Well, Jonathan and I discussed that, and we said that money was intended by the voters to be put to use, to do the things that Measure X said it was going to do: enhancing public safety, reducing the impacts of homelessness, infrastructure, roads, paving, gang intervention, things like that. So we said, well, let's put together a plan that's still conservative, that ensures that we have a cushion at the end, but not a $9.9 million cushion. Instead, a cushion where we can implement some really cool programs. So I'm really excited. It's actually tonight, September 28th, that we're going to go to council and we're going to make this recommendation for these new programs and enhancement to existing programs.
So the projects that Measure X has already funded includes all the new development down by the pier,
Well,
right?
the Beachfront Improvement Project was definitely a part, but we were also fortunate through our Assembly member, Tasha Horner-Forbath's office, that we were able to get grant funding, significant grant funding from the state, and we're very appreciative of that. And that allowed us to stretch that Measure X dollar even further.
So specifically, what is the average citizen seeing that they've benefited from?
So the one thing that they see is that Beachfront Improvement Project. We have hundreds of miles of street paving and repairs all throughout the city that are making a huge difference on the overall quality of our roads. I just literally watched construction start on a new fire station, Fire Station 1. The current Fire Station 1 goes back almost 100 years, I believe, and it is not adequate for the type of apparatus and staffing.
Next to the Museum of Art.
Yes, exactly. So we're building a whole new fire station that is funded primarily by Measure X, but again, through our state, or our U.S. Congressperson, we were able to get grant funding that helps us offset some of those costs as well.
Mike Levin?
Yes, Mike Levin, exactly. So we were able to get money from the federal government, and we're starting construction now. We had a ribbon cutting ceremony, so that's going to be a huge impact to not only the downtown area, but throughout the city. Other programs that you see is we have an additional homeless outreach team that goes around. So originally we had one. Measure X has allowed us to double that. We have enhanced our emergency response in our fire department through added EMTs. Before Measure X, we didn't have EMTs. We only had firefighter paramedics. Now we were able to hire EMTs, which have two major benefits. One is that it allows us to be more flexible in our response, more agile and more quick when there's an emergency, especially a medical emergency. But it also creates a pipeline for future firefighter paramedics if they choose to go that route and they get a taste of what it's like to be in that world and they want to do it. Now they've got that experience, and we help get them through medic school and become firefighters. So that's a really cool benefit.
So can I ask a question? Because we were just talking to some of the candidates for City Council, and the issue of spending, we've seen a lot of spending down by the pier, but spending in the neighborhoods came up. And the idea that some of the community centers that we have, that some of the resources in the neighborhoods really need funding, that there's maintenance that is not being kept up and that kind of thing. So is this something which Measure X could fund?
Measure X is limited in some of the things that it can fund because that's what the voters approved, what was in the ballot language. There is some opportunity for funding of parks and recreation, but I would remind folks too that this isn't the only source of funding. We were fortunate enough through the American Rescue Plan Act to receive significant funding, of which we are reinvesting in our community resource centers. So for instance, the American Rescue Plan Act is funding a complete rehabilitation and renovation of the Crown Heights Resource Center.
Good.
And also the John Landis Recreation Center. So that one won't be as complete as the Crown Heights Resource Center, but it will include programming out there as well. One thing I'll mention though about Measure X to that point is part of the package that we're bringing, this revised spending plan, is going to include $650,000 this year for gang intervention and youth programming, and $800,000 going forward. And I think that's a really important benefit of having a funding source like Measure X versus, say, a one-off funding source. It allows you to do a lot more in terms of programming that will benefit the community as opposed to just, well, here's some money, but then it's gone the next year.
Right.
Having that over time really builds resiliency in the community.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear that we have actually more than we thought. Just looking for a moment at what we have already seen being done with Measure X, which is that all that new development around the pier, the new public bathrooms, the new police station. I was just curious to know why it took so long, because it's taken over a year to build that, and you see houses going up along the Strand in half that time. So were there problems that were unanticipated with that project?
And I could probably speak a little bit to that one. So really we ran into a couple issues there. One of the biggest issues that we ran into were some unforeseen construction impacts that took place very early on in the project. When you have an area of the city such as that is as old as it is, there's a lot of, what I'll call buried treasure out there. So when we started doing some of the excavation for some of the construction, initially we ran into a lot of subsurface debris that we had no idea was there, including some big pieces of concrete, some old pipes that we had no idea were there as well. So we had to take an early step back in the project in order to address some of those construction difficulties that were experienced early on. Like many other things that were happening during COVID, we ran into significant delays in terms of being able to obtain construction materials. And so they, with all the supply chain issues that were taking place, that absolutely had an impact in terms of the timing of that project, because we were waiting on materials as many other people were for different projects as well, which caused some delays. We did run into some disputes with the contractor as well, which certainly added some time to the project as well. So it was really kind of a combination of factors, but to your point, absolutely, the project did take a lot longer than we had anticipated, but it is now complete, so we're relieved to see that it is now complete and being well used. Yes,
it's a big improvement. I guess while we're on the subject, I just have to mention that I've noticed that the Strand is already flooding sometimes at king tides at that spot. And I'm wondering, what is the city thinking about in terms of sea level rise? Because here we've just spent millions of dollars on that new project, and already the street in front of it is flooding. Is the city really thinking about 10, 20 years in the future when it's building these new facilities?
Absolutely it is. And even the design of the facility that was just built was actually designed with resilience in mind. And if you were able to go into those buildings, you would see that the critical infrastructure within those buildings is elevated. They're designed in such a way to withstand wave rush. So when we do coastal planning along the coastline, we do actually have to account for sea level rise, and vulnerability assessments are conducted as well. One of the projects that's happening out there that's just being planned now is what we call the Beachfront Phase 2 project, which will involve the reconstruction of the band shell and amphitheater, and then also some physical upgrades to the Junior Seau Community Center as well. All that is also taking place at the same time. We're looking at essentially reconstructing the concrete portion of the pier, which I'm sure you've heard about. All of that construction is being done with sea level rise in mind, and we coordinate very closely with the Coastal Commission to make sure that the projections and assessments that we're doing to plan for that resiliency is consistent with what the Coastal Commission would like to see, because at the end of the day, they also have permitting authority over that development. Right. So we do work closely with them. It is a very significant community impact. We're also in the process of updating our local coastal program in conjunction with the Coastal Commission. And as part of that, we did have to complete a vulnerability assessment for our entire coastline, taking a look at all the infrastructure that's existing out there that's planned in the future and how that infrastructure can be planned to accommodate future sea level rise. It is a very big issue, and it is something that we're very mindful of as we plan moving forward.
Mm-hmm. The bandshell, of course, is something that the community is very attached to, and the Junior Sao Community Center, we're holding hearings, I understand. Is that where we're at? Where are we at with?
Yeah, so we've been undergoing a pretty extensive community engagement process with both those improvements, and we're just about to the finish line, working out some final details to get community buy-in on the final design. There's a lot of nostalgia and history attached to those buildings, and so it's no surprise that there was a very high level of community interest to make sure that we were maintaining the integrity of those facilities and the history as we were planning on moving forward. So
I haven't really been following this debate, but I mean, can I ask, is the existing construction of those two things likely to disappear and be replaced, or will they just be modified? What's the...
Sure. Well, speaking first for the Junior Sao Community Center, we heard very loud and clear from the community that they would like that building, as we call, lovingly restored. So essentially it'll remain in place as it's currently designed for the most part, with some, at the same time, with some significant improvements to the area. We need to do ADA improvements in there. Certainly modernize some of the facility there, but by and large part, it's going to remain intact out there and get a really nice, fresh look out there. And we're really excited to see those concepts. As far as the bandshell and the amphitheater are concerned, essentially that's going to require a completely reconstruction of those facilities. One of the challenges that we face with that facility is a lack of ADA access into those buildings, and we literally can't do anything out there in terms of any facility upgrades without completely addressing and bringing that property up to current ADA standards, which essentially effectively requires a complete redesign of those buildings. So that will be coming down completely and reconstructed at some point.
So I'm sure there'll be a lot of community input on that.
There is, and there has been,
yes.
And we're very close to bringing those final concept plans to the City Council.
I see. Okay.
I would expect that you'll see them presented in their final conceptual form to the City Council this fall.
Okay.
Once we have those plans in place, our next big challenge is going to be to try and secure the funding for the final design and ultimately the construction of those facilities. So that's a future conversation that we'll be having with our City Council to identify the funding source for those improvements.
Okay. You were mentioning that we earned more in our half-cent sales tax than we were expecting. We have a lot of new businesses, a lot of new restaurants that are popping up all over the place, aren't they? While we're on the subject of the pier, Ruby's has been shut for 2 seasons now. Why is it taking so long? Yes,
so we do have an operator now that stepped forward to bring that. So essentially, one of the reasons that project was delayed was because Ruby's was going through some bankruptcy proceedings, and so there was a whole legal process that was playing out. And while that was happening, you know, the restaurant was shut down. The city was approached by an operator, and I'm happy to say it's a local operator who's planning on reopening the restaurant. As a matter of fact, today we're having a developers conference with the developer to review their concept plans, and it is a local operator, the same family that operates the Wrench and Rodent restaurant, and as well as a couple of others here in the city, will be the operator of that restaurant. So we're really excited about it. And
can you give us some clues as to what kind of restaurant it might be?
Absolutely. So for those who have been out there, there's actually 2 different buildings out at the end of the pier. There's the main restaurant where Ruby's was sited, but there's also a separate, detached, essentially snack bar building. And so they do plan on operating both. The snack bar building, which would be open first, and hoping to get that open by the end of the year, is actually going to be essentially selling kind of hand foods out there, you know, wraps, burgers, things of that nature, some ice cream, sundries, and so forth. The restaurant itself will still be have a seafood theme, is my understanding. And it will be, though, have a diverse menu so that it'll cater to all economic segments of the community. That's very important on our beachfront, and something that
Right.
you know, we have to be mindful of, is making sure that any amenities that are offered out there are offered for the broader community. So
Okay.
the restaurant operator has been committed to providing a diverse menu out there. That portion is going to take a little bit longer because there is some reconstruction of that building plan.
Well, I mean, we've noticed all the scaffolding underneath.
Right,
so
exactly. So
Are there
that-
some problems with the end of the pier, or?
No, it's actually, that scaffolding is being put in place in anticipation of some of the remodeling that
I
has
see.
to be done in the
Okay.
restaurant. But that restaurant won't open until sometime later next year.
Okay. So while we're on the subject of the pier,
Mm-hmm.
Michael, you were saying that perhaps residents will be seeing some changes there in the next few months?
Yeah, so the City Council approved the replacement of all the utilities, the stuff people don't really think about at the pier but are really important, specifically water, sewer, and electric. So that will all be replaced. It's going to be about a year-long project, so it'll bleed over a little bit into next summer. But you'll see some scaffolding around, and you'll see a lot of work, and you'll see some construction trucks. We might lose some parking temporarily, but it's really important that we maintain the pier. Obviously, it's a pier, it's near the ocean, and that's a pretty harsh environment, so things tend to wear out. And if you don't replace them, then bad things can happen. So.
Right. Now, one of the other things that we notice as Oceanside changes is the big contrast between high-end resorts, hotels, and we still have homeless people who are living on the streets. I understand that you're the one who is taking most responsibility for what Oceanside is doing with the homeless. Can you tell us a bit about, what more is being planned? We know about the navigation center that's about to open soon. Perhaps you can tell us why that's taking so long, and whether there's more things in the future that we have planned to take care of this population.
Yeah, well, obviously, homelessness in Oceanside is probably the city's top priority. It is the city's top priority. We understand, we hear about it all the time. We're very cognizant of the fact that this is a concern to all of our residents. It's also important to point out that homelessness is a statewide, regional, countywide problem. This is not just an Oceanside problem. That said, we're eager to partner with, and we have partnered with, both the county, with our county partners and the state, in order to find any opportunity we can to fix this issue in the long run.
I should point out that we've just become the city in North County that has the most homeless, which perhaps is an indication that it's a nice city to live in and they like it too. But it's something that we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. We also are the largest city in North County by a pretty significant margin too, so that's something to keep in mind when you think about that. But what we're doing besides the navigation center, which has been delayed in terms of some construction, but we're excited that it'll be opening in the early part of next calendar year. In the meantime, we still have our hotel voucher program that is also being run by San Diego Rescue Mission, the same people that will operate the navigation center. And that's been a very successful program in terms of getting people matched up with services, but also giving us the opportunity to say, look, you can't sleep here, but here's a place that you can sleep, because I think that's really important. We want to be humane and respectful to all of our residents, both housed and unhoused. Other things that you can see coming in the future besides the navigation center, we are trying to ensure that crime, whether it's homelessness related or not, in our downtown core is being met with quickly, and people feel safe, businesses feel safe, tourists feel safe, residents feel safe, everybody feels safe, including homeless people. They should feel safe too. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're increasing our security presence in the downtown area that will both reduce the amount of crime that we have, but it will also help us communicate with our residents and communicate with homeless people in terms of what is available to them, and we will be able to get them to the right place to get the help that they need.
What's that going to look like? I mean, when you say increased presence?
Yeah. So it's going to look like two things. One, we're going to have 4 security officers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's going to be a kiosk near the underpass next to Parlor Donuts where people can come and ask for help, ask for direction. There will be vehicles associated with the officers so they can respond quickly when somebody is not being safe. And they'll have bicycles. So it's going to be a very agile group. Also, certain areas in our downtown area have more problems, complaints, et cetera, than others, specifically the Oceanside Transit Center. So there will be a focus on that too. That will be included in the footprint. It is something that we take seriously. We want our downtown core and all of our neighborhoods to be safe, and we think that this is a really good tool to do that. In addition to that, we're going to start seeing more police presence also as we reallocate resources. So, but this is going to be the security team and our police are going to be, it's a partnership between them and Main Street Oceanside. So.
I was noticing from the budget that the police make up about 30% of the total budget of city staffing already. So, you know, one of the questions is whether police are the most appropriate people to be working with this population.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that you actually asked that question, because I think that kind of goes back to the Measure X discussion that we were having. You are correct that it is a very large portion of our budget, which is very typical, especially for a city of our size, that would be the largest portion of a budget. But I think that is a really good question, is like, we want, you know, what's the right tool to deal with individual situations and issues? And one of the things that I'm really excited about that our Chief Armijo has brought forward through Measure X is the addition of over 30 community services officers. So those folks, they're not carrying a gun, they're not sworn, but they do work for the police, and they will have a slightly different approach, and I think that that's a really good way to deal with that. The other thing is that with our HOT, or our homeless outreach teams, we also have social workers assigned, and that's also through a partnership with the county. But having those social workers along with officers is another great way.
Are they going to be in uniform?
They will have the community service officers will have uniforms, but they won't be police uniforms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the Navigation Center hasn't opened yet. I know you're hoping to. The trouble is that it's only for 30 days, right? That people can remain there. It will be open all year round, but people can only stay for 30 days. So the big question is, you can't solve somebody's life in 30 days. What happens then?
Oh, that's another excellent question. So actually, the fact that it's only 30 days is, I think, a really positive thing. And that's the reason why we're really trying to say Navigation Center, which I appreciate you recognizing, and not shelter. Because this is a place to get people matched up, get them back on track. So everybody has different needs. You can't get those needs met. If you're dealing with substance abuse or a serious persistent mental illness, you can't deal with that very well if you're living in the river. But if you can get stabilized in a place where you can get a hot shower, you know you're going to be fed, you don't have to worry about anything happening to you in your sleep, then you can start thinking about those next steps. And that's the beauty of the Navigation Center. They develop a plan for each individual and say, okay, what's your next step? What are your needs? Let's find you the right resources, because there's resources out there. You just have to know how to navigate that. And that's the beauty of the Navigation Center. If you know, we only have 50 beds at this point, there's future possible, you know, increased capacity, but at this point we have 50 beds. If we only just filled up those 50 beds and closed the door and said, okay, we got our 50, that really wouldn't solve the problem in the long run. So I think it's really important that it is a transitional place.
I think it's also important to mention that we also have transitional housing projects that are underway as well to actually help them find a more permanent solution towards housing. As a matter of fact, right down the street on the Greenbrier Square project, has been approved by our city council, should start construction pretty soon as well. That is actually a fairly large transitional housing project on Apple Street that will actually specifically target formerly homeless population. And we also have a number of projects also scattered throughout the city as well that also serve that transitional population. So, you know, it is kind of part of a larger network, but at the end of the day, we're also doing what we can to find a more permanent housing solutions once they do transition out of those shelters.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that you're saying it's the top priority, yeah. We could talk more about that, but I think we should move on to perhaps the other side of that, which is new housing for people who live in Oceanside. And you're the development, you have been part of the planning process, that's your specialty. So the city has got a new general plan, which I think not many people are really aware of, and which will guide where new development happens in the city over the next decades. Can you give us a bit of a thumbnail of what the sort of overall vision is of how Oceanside will change? Because we have to add hundreds, if not thousands, of new homes. Where are those homes going to go? How is Oceanside going to change?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, we are actually in the middle of a general plan update project. We have implemented some elements, but by and large, we're still kind of working towards getting that project to City Council for final approval, but we're well underway now. And as a matter of fact, our City Council did recently approve a preferred growth alternative for the city. So to answer your question, most of the future development, including housing development, which is generally the most high-profile type of development out there, will be focused along our transit corridors. So along Oceanside Boulevard, Mission Avenue, Coast Highway, and to some extent some portions of Vista Way as well. And it's actually a smart growth plan. We're working on what's called a smart and sustainable corridors plan. And it's essentially leveraging our transit options to mirror up with where we plan future housing. By and large, we're trying really hard to protect our single-family neighborhoods and really channel all the future growth near transit, which is really where it belongs. Our latest RENA allocation, which is the allocation that we get from the state, is requesting that we plan for about 5,400 residential units. And so we're able to accommodate that growth.
How many years?
Over the next, it's an 8-year planning document.
So over 5,000 new homes in the next 8 years?
Yes, that's what we're required to plan for under the state law. And so generally all that growth we can accommodate along our corridors.
And does that mean that most of those new buildings are going to be apartment blocks? I mean, we've seen these pictures of the new apartment block that's planned near the transit center, which is a bit of a shock, I think, to a lot of Oceanside residents because we're so used to single-family homes. What would you say about how this new building is going to look?
Yeah, I would say generally most of the housing will be what we call multifamily housing, which is a combination of condominiums and apartments. You know, for a city such as ours, which is essentially built out, we have to plan efficiently, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of land that has yet to be touched that we can plan a traditional single-family neighborhood in. So most of the development taking place now and in the future will be kind of higher density housing, but it does also provide additional opportunities to make that housing affordable because it is really important to be able to accommodate our entry-level homeowners as well. And generally that's the type of housing that they would first move into.
And for developers, we spoke with some people who were mentioning that it's quite hard to attract developers. I mean, would you say that's the case? It seems to me that Oceanside is an up-and-coming city. Developers should be fairly motivated to come and build here. How easy or difficult is it to attract developers to come here?
It's relatively easy. We actually have some pretty streamlined planning processes in place in comparison to many other jurisdictions, and so I would say there's really no shortage of developers who are interested in you know, coming to Oceanside. Of course, our challenge as staff is to make sure that they're developing responsibly, which is always a challenge and something that we spend a lot of time on to make sure that the development is a good fit to the community. Yeah, so we have a lot of planning documents in place. Of course, I can't overemphasize how important it is for this updated general plan to get adopted by the City Council, and we expect to bring that to them for final adoption sometime probably around the spring of next year. But that planning document will really guide the development in terms of its look, its feel, the amenities, not only for the residents, for the public at large, that will be expected as far as future development is concerned. Many of the city's planning documents date back to the 1970s, which is not good. And so we really think that this updated general plan is going to be a key to really getting the city where it needs to be and making sure that everything is developed in a responsible and sustainable manner.
I know you've been having public workshops to try to communicate to people what the general plan has and asking for comments. Is that process nearly at an end, or are there still opportunities for people to look and say, hey, this, you know, I suggest something different? Yeah,
well, the bulk of the outreach has actually been completed to date, which is kind of where we got to this preferred growth alternative. I would say, with the exception of some of the conversations that have been happening with respect to the future of South Morro Hills, which is, you know, a very contentious area of the city in terms of the future vision for that area. I am pleased to say that the balance of the general plan in terms of promoting smart growth along our corridors while preserving our single-family neighborhoods has been very well received by the community. As a matter of fact, when we took our preferred growth alternative to the City Council recently, I don't believe we had any public opposition to it, which was wonderful to see.
Okay. Some of the graphics that I've seen on that plan suggest that we'll be seeing multi-story blocks along perhaps Oceanside Boulevard that aren't there now. So, you know, the face of Oceanside is going to change, isn't it? So is there any way that you can express to the community how their input, because I think they often feel that they're not being listened to, how their input is best made to the city manager's office.
So absolutely, and I would say really the key in that is to make sure that you're engaged in the process. You know, we've had, you know, dozens of community workshops over the past few years. I will say that despite the COVID challenge in terms of getting the community to engage, we've had an incredible level of community engagement in this plan, more so than any other planning process.
Okay, good.
You know, in terms of the long-term planners that have been in the city, by and large, this is the largest amount of public feedback that we have been able to receive. So it has been well received, but you know, the point that you raise is something that really is important, because how that development presents itself to the community in terms of the compatibility with our existing neighborhoods is really, really important. So I think,
and whether you have parks and trails, you know, buildings is one thing, but do we have parks and trails built into the plan?
Exactly, and that's the beauty of planning for the city's future as part of a comprehensive plan, which is something that we're really doing for the first time in terms of bringing all those elements together and planning cohesively as ones to make sure that the growth that we have is balanced in terms of the needs for parks, infrastructure, public safety. Everything is being looked at collectively right now, which is really, really important, to make sure that we have that balance that ensures the quality of life for residents moving forward.
I was encouraged to see that the city does have an arborist, somebody who is concerned about trees, because as the city grows, having more trees, I think, will help to soften that blocky skyline that we've got in our future. We don't have a lot of time. I just wanted to ask, generally we have some very wonderful assets in Oceanside, including the harbor and the airport. Are those assets things that generate revenue, or are they things that cost us?
So generally speaking, I'll start with the harbor first. The harbor is essentially a break-even proposition. Okay. So we do receive revenue in the harbor, you know, from parking, from the leases that we have out there, from the slip renters that pay to have their boats out there as well. But there's also a lot of costs involved of running a harbor. As a matter of fact, one of the challenges that we have moving forward is we've identified probably close to $20 million worth of infrastructure upgrades that need to be made out there long term. As Michael mentioned earlier, having infrastructure in a marine environment is very challenging. So we're working on identifying a potential funding source for those infrastructure upgrades. As far as the airport is concerned, it generates a little bit of revenue. I think last year it generated about $140,000 in revenue. Moving forward, it is an amenity, you know, that does serve a need here in the community, and so moving forward, I know that there are some upgrades that will be planned there. Upgrades to the facilities, not necessarily the amount of air traffic, which is something I don't think that we would be supportive of.
Okay.
But certainly there are some facility upgrades that are planned out there as well. But we do have a long-term operator out there who's got a 50-year operating agreement, and in our conversations with them, they plan on continuing to run the airport during the duration of that agreement.
Okay. Now, quickly, you had said you were involved with financial department war, and we have had some controversy in the city over our city treasurer recently and the treasury manager, I understand. Would you say that there's any risk to the city's finances or its assets as a result of these controversies, and does anything need to change?
I would say, first off, absolutely not. There's no risk to the city's assets or finances. As a matter of fact, we saw a 23% increase year over year in the amount in the Treasury. Now, a lot of that is enhanced revenues. It's not just earnings in the Treasury. But last year, we saw a yield of about 1.34%, which sounds like low figures, but for government entity, that's not just on par, but above par what other governments see in terms of returns. We have a lot of controls in place and a lot of oversight in terms of what's going on with the day-to-day transactions and the operations of that. So people should be completely at ease that there is no risk to the money that's there. As far as do changes need to be made, I would say that there's always opportunity, if you can, to enhance controls and to ensure that there are adequate checks and balances, and that one of the things that the City Council has directed us to do is to bring to them a recommended minimum qualifications for a future elected treasurer, as is done in other cities. So that's something that we will be doing probably on October 5th, is to bring recommended minimum qualifications for that position.
Okay. We just have a couple of minutes, and I'd like to end by asking each of you, perhaps you first, Michael, what is the most exciting thing that you think, and what is the most challenging thing for the future of Oceanside that you're seeing in your position as the Assistant City Manager?
I think the most exciting thing is seeing the growth, the attractiveness of the city, and our opportunity to make it the kind of growth that we want to see and not be overrun by just what outside interests might want it to look like. I think that's really exciting.
What outside interests, like developers? Or
outside interests, like, yes,
Okay.
developers. Additionally, I think as far as like challenges go, homelessness across the state, like I said, it's not just an Oceanside thing, will continue to be a challenge because it's not just one thing. You know, it's affordable housing, yes, but it's also available supportive services such as substance abuse counseling and mental health supportive services. And those are things that the city just has never had the funding or responsibility for. So it's going to take a real partnership between the state, county, and city. Across the state, all cities are going to have to confront this, and we're going to have to make changes because it's, as a state, the homelessness situation is only getting worse. So what we're doing now isn't working, and we're going to have to make some changes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, what would you say is the thing you're most excited about and the thing that you really perhaps are quite concerned about in the future?
In terms of what I'm excited about, I would probably echo what Michael just mentioned. I mean, I feel fortunate to be a part of the city's leadership team during a period of time in which we're experiencing a significant growth. And, you know, I would hope that my experience as a land use planner could really help make sure that that growth is measured and at the end of the day, you know, has a positive net impact on the community and our neighborhoods. As far as the challenges go, one thing that we haven't talked about much today that I think is right up there in terms of priority with homelessness is sand on our beaches. That's a huge issue in the community. Our city council is focusing a lot of resources, not only in terms of monetary resources, but also staffing resources. We just hired a first-time coastal zone administrator, which we're really thrilled about, Jamie Timberlake, who we've brought on board as well. But making sure that we have sand on our beaches, that we're looking long-term in terms of developing a constant source of sand so we can continue to have sandy beaches is super important to the community, and not only to the locals but to the visitors as well, and to really the city's local economy. It's imperative that we have sandy beaches because the fact of the matter is a lot of our economy is driven by visitors, and so we need to make sure that we can keep sand on our beaches, and that really is one of the other big challenges that's facing the city. And we have a number of plans and programs in place to, I think, really for the first time, really try and be proactive about making sure that that's happening. So that would probably be my biggest challenge right now as well.
Great. I'm so glad you brought up the sand issue because we could talk about that for a long time, and in fact we have had whole shows here on KOCT about that very issue. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about the city. I'd like to thank our city manager, Jonathan Borrego, who has been the city manager just for a couple of months and is coming out front and being very transparent, so I appreciate your presence very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And Michael Gossman, our assistant city manager, thank you for all you're doing for the homeless. We will hope that you come back and stay in touch and keep us filled in with what's going on with Measure X.
Yeah, I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Okay. So, and thank you so much for watching. Stay connected through KOCT's program. We'll keep bringing programs about the City of Oceanside so that you have a deeper understanding of this very rapidly changing community. I'm Alison St. John for the KOCT Roundtable.
KOCT, the voice of North County.